Hi, y'all. It's Brigitte Cutshall with Real Things Living. Today, my guest is Shishkin. He is a serial entrepreneur and he is the CEO of Informed. Can you say hi, Kira?
Hi, Brigitte. Thank you for having me.
I love talking to, I should say younger people, but you guys have a different perspective as someone like me who's been through the around the world a lot more. And I think that's good. I think we need to, one, before we got on this call, we talked earlier about how important it is that we have to have curiosity, right? And I guess my first curious question is what prompted you to go down this path to start Informed? And then you can tell us what it's actually about.
Absolutely. And that all sounds great. So grateful to be here. Thank you for inviting me on and having this conversation with me. So, to answer your question, what prompted me to start Informed, which, for context, Informed is your daily news concierge for navigating misinformation overload. And what really got me into building Informed is obviously personal frustration, growing up in a frustrated world where we can no longer trust media. Media has not just different incentives, but the opposite incentives from what we have as users. And I think maybe a bit of a story is I grew up across information conflict and misinformation campaigns. I am originally from Ukraine, from Kiev, and I kind of grew up in the Ukraine-Russia schism, where there was a clear truth, and there was a pretty multifaceted propaganda that was being pushed down throats of a lot of Russian people and a lot of just Eastern Europeans that Ukraine belonged to Russia or things of that sort. And it early on in my life just gave me a very clear sense that hey, like you cannot trust a lot of the things that you see out there. In kind of the second part of my life, I actually moved to the Middle East and I lived in Israel for almost a decade. And that opened me to a whole explosion of multipolarity, of misinformation overload, where every side was continuously trying to convince the other that their version of truth was the version of truth. And it took the bipolar conflict in Ukraine, Ukraine-Russia, or Europe-Russia, to now so many different angles that exist in the Middle East that make it so complicated. And then coming to the United States, kind of for my next and now ongoing chapter, I've also been here for almost a decade. You know, you'd think we have it all figured out here. You'd think, okay, in the US, they've got it all down. And it turns out the level of information conflict in the United States is akin to a civil war. And that is kind of ongoing and rampant. And so that experience across so many different places has just reassured me that, wow, we need to get news right. Because most people's interaction with politics isn't actually directly with politics, it's with news about politics. Most of people's interaction with the economy, of course, is personal with your wallet, but also through the news about the economy. And so news is your channel towards everything that's going on around you, whether that's local or global, but that channel is broken right now. The well is poisoned. And so we wanted to make a difference in clearing that up a little bit, making that more consumable, more accessible, and more clear.
I like that. We want to hear what's real, what the truth is. And I agree with you. It has changed a lot since I grew up majority of my life in the United States, and I've seen it changed. And I believe politics, though, in my opinion, sorry, has always meant to be a little divisive. They're trying to get you to agree with them. And I've always been a believer in just getting the facts. That's what I think is important. And we have focused, I'm saying the US, too much on opinions. And I mean, it's okay to have an opinion, but at the same time, you need to have facts. And I think for some reason, the media, to me, in my brain, because I grew up in the US, to me, the media is about an industry, really about how you're going to get information. It could be media could mean getting fiction movies. It could mean books. It could mean, right? That's kind of how I see media. And I named my company Gemini Media over 20 years ago because I was helping people with books, right? Because a book is considered a form of media, reading. And I've never gone down the path of news, but I mean, I'm doing a podcast now, right? But my podcast was started because I wanted to share these real stories. And as you're talking, I guess when I was young, I was going to be a journalist because I wanted to tell the truth. That's kind of ingrained in my brain for some reason.
Yeah.
I grew up, I was born right before the Vietnam War, okay, right around that time. So I grew up hearing all this stuff, hearing, but the protests, things like that about Vietnam. I wasn't involved. I was very, very young, but I'm a military brat. And so my father was in Vietnam. And so you get a different perspective of the soldiers who are actually there versus, what you're hearing. And I think it's so true. And now I think with tech, has it improved so much, the digital aspect, it's so much easier to throw out information. And people I think, are overwhelmed, and then the lack of trust is going on. That's for sure. And I just want to know, I'm one of the people, I want to know the facts, and then I'll think about what to do.
Yeah, you want to make up your own mind, and I feel like the way the news is done in the United States is you're being bombarded with perspectives, being
Yes.
bombarded with an anchor talking about an issue, and then his facial expressions are changing, or her word choice is particular, and
Yeah.
they're putting out sort of these off-the-shelf perspectives. Here's the Fox News perspective, here's the CNN perspective, here's the NBC perspective. And so you're being bombarded with this sort of panel of perspectives. And it's really hard, it's really noisy to actually figure out where do you stand. Like, am I just going to adopt that perspective or that other perspective? Well, what about making up your own? What about from the first principles, from the facts themselves, actually building your own opinion with facts as building blocks? And I feel like that process has been robbed of us in America
Right.
because everybody is just being told, here's one perspective, here's another perspective, choose one, right? Or maybe choose one of two or choose one of three at most, and that's going to be your position. It's like, wait a second, is that really how simplified we're gonna take it? And there aren't really alternatives where, a media source is giving you the facts and lets you make up your own mind. Most of the time, you are kind of being forced, you're being pushed to pick sides. And so with what we're doing is a reaction to that reality, reaction to the reality of being forced to pick sides. Is our whole mentality is around, like, what if we gave you the building blocks of your own opinion? What if we
Yes.
gave you the building blocks of making up your own mind so that you can be informed without being influenced, and that you can actually, naturally develop an opinion? And that's very much the mission of what we do with Informed. And according to our users, at least, which is people ultimately who we listen to, we've been doing a pretty good job at that.
That's good. We need to, like you said, you need to have facts. And that's kind of what your platform, I guess I should call it platform, is doing. And that's why I don't watch the news. I don't care. I read. I get the local, I look at facts. Occasionally I'll read some opinions, like on New York Times or something. I also have a subscription to Routers, or I'm not sure if I
Mhm.
pronounced it right. Routers, Routers, whatever. And they are more, there's not much, I haven't seen much opinion based on that. That's why I like
Yeah,
that. And I
yeah,
think all these people don't realize these other news outlets, they're getting the info from, like, is it Routers or Routers? They're getting it from that, and then they're putting their opinion in there. That's kind of how I see it. And maybe, I'm not sure, is your app phone only or is it
yeah, yeah.
okay.
I love that you mentioned Reuters.
You're right.
It's it's not none of the above. It's Reuters, yeah. But they're some of our favorites, right? We have got a sort of a top list of outlets that we think do really quality work. that don't infuse their opinion into their writing. And Reuters is definitely up there with some of the best in the game. So we really
Yes.
enjoy Reuters. The problem with Reuters is it's expensive,
Yes.
and it's it also has this whole ecosystem where don't just be subscribed to Reuters, be subscribed to Reuters plus this, plus that. Here is
Right,
the
right.
You get looped into this whole world of more. This world of maximalism, where people are increasingly demanding and saying, "Hey, I want my minimalism back. I want to be media minimalist. I want to be news minimalist. I don't want to have it all bombarded into me every day." And so with Reuters, we kind of have this distinction. There is what we call reporting and what we call journalism. And journalism is, and these are confused terms, and no one really knows what anything means. This is just how we define them. So journalism to us is more of the opinion, right? Is when Brigitte wants to go and read New York Times to get a cultural perspective. Reporting is more of having reporters on the ground in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Iran, in Israel, in Ukraine, in the UK Parliament, in the Wall Street trading floor, right? It's having those reporters on the ground who are collecting information,
Yeah.
collecting the facts, and then bringing them together. Sometimes there's a bit of writing about it, but there isn't a lot of op-ed. There isn't a lot of opinion. And so reporting is the type of journalism or the type of writing, we don't even call it journalism, where that's what we honor and that's what we love. And informed, we don't really do news, we do reporting. I guess we don't do journalism, we do reporting. And that allows us to stay at this level of talking about facts, talking about what, where, and when, instead of telling you what you should think about it or how we should describe the certain thing. We limit ourselves to that reporting layer. And the way we do it is sort of twofold. One is we have a huge interest in primary sources. So I think the majority and an increasing share of our work, we take you straight to primary sources. So we have our own hooks to the CDC, to BLS, to the White House, to Census Bureau, to the Bureau of Economic Development, anything, US and international. So also the UN, also the UK, also Australia, you name it. When there is an event happening, whether it could even be a business announcement, we take our information straight from the horse's mouth, and we are friends with all the horses, which is nice. It allows us to take that sort of information directly instead of taking it through filters and layers of interpretation. And when we bring forth an item, a topic of discussion, we take our readers straight to the source if they want to learn more. And we also take all our information directly from the source. So there's no interpretive layers in between. Now, sometimes there is no primary source, and that's pretty common. And in that case, we rely on an aggregation, and a huge aggregation of every reporter that has been on site. So we don't take it from the New York Times columnists. We don't take it from the OPAD people in the Washington Post. We take it from the Associated Press, Reuters, BBC reporters that are there on the ground collecting facts. And we don't take it just from one of them, we take it from all of them to ensure that we have this aggregate level neutrality.
I'm glad you brought up the Associated Press, as I was going to ask you that as well. It is right. The word I was misinterpreting. I meant to say I wanted to be a reporter when I was younger. And that's kind of what I did. That's kind of how I was. My poor family. When I was young, I would write up, what happened that day in sports. I don't know. I just kind of how I was like, this is what happened today. I would tape it on my brother's door, but that's just, I've always been curious,
Oh my
and
God.
he he tolerated me, but I think that's good. I think we need to be curious, and we need to, like you mentioned before we recorded, we want to cultivate communities too, right? And you have to have the right mindset of all this. And I think what is good about getting these facts is you're seeing the actual perspective of that data, right? And you're not going to be hearing biased stuff. I try not to, like I said, I don't watch the news because it annoys me. Sorry, it just because I know I have a background in marketing, by the way, here, so
Yeah,
a degree in that. So I know what goes in all this stuff, right? And I also have a degree in economics, right? So there's a book, I forgot what it's called, How to Lie with Statistics, and that was written in the 50s or the 60s. And it's true. That's just how we're trying to, I don't know, make people fall in line, right?
yeah,
There's so many ways, and that's why I think there's distrust out there because people aren't hearing facts. They're just too many opinions. And I like how you're pulling the data from those sites. Um, you need to be curious, right? And I think that'll help you make better decisions.
absolutely,
And you want to be a good role model for everybody. I think,
absolutely,
and I think when people see all these opinions, they're reacting too much, or there's also there's so much fear that is out there. I think that's I don't know both sides of the I call it the political thing. It's just so much fear, and that makes people not want to take action, right?
absolutely. I love what you kind of bring up here, which is I think it's worth kind of distinguishing what's been done today, the damage that's been done by the news industry as it is right now, the incumbent news industry, is I would go as far as saying that the polarization that we have in this country right now, which is I kind of mentioned really radically earlier, is at the brink of a information civil war. I think we're in the middle of an information civil war as we speak. And I think now it's like, oh, this is just day to day. But I think looking back, grandchildren will look at that and say, wow, that was a period of civil war of information in America. And we're just living in it. So it's kind of hard to tell. But the level of polarization that exists in this country is very much directly a responsibility of the news industry, right? The news industry feeds like most people's interaction, the everyday person's interaction with politics is through news. It's news about politics, not really politics directly.
Right.
With most things, it's like people interact and react to those things through what they see in the news. And the way news have been communicating and triggering people purposefully and engaging people in ways that are triggering a response, like clickbaiting instigating almost a perspective or instigating people's reactions. That reactionary news is the reason we are in such a hyperpolarized society, which is really sad because actually I don't think we disagree on that many things. We've been made to disagree on so many things. And I think it's really cruel and it's really unfair. And so that's sort of the role of or that's the responsibility and sort of the guilt, the blame of the news industry today. And it's really, really unfortunate. But news can also be a source of community and power and unity and kind of cohesion. And that's how we're trying to see our mission is can we create a community through news instead of creating polarization through news? And I think it starts with very much not pushing people to react, not pushing people to trigger certain opinions, and not, as I mentioned earlier, giving them these reactionary, like, do you believe this perspective or do you side with that perspective without forcing them to pick sides? I think the forcing people to pick sides is one of the main sort of, leading reasons for why folks are so polarized. And so we do the opposite. We try to give people a common fact base that is shared across, whatever you believe. This is just what happened, right? This is where it happened. This is, when. This is the context that surrounds that specific event. There is no suggestion of whether that's good or bad. There's no suggestion of how you should think about this. And so I think the level of polarization in the US right now is we don't even agree on what we disagree on. There is such a schism in fact bases. We are trying to at least bridge that schism and say, okay, well, we see the same facts. We have different opinions based on them, but at least we're operating on the same fact base. That is not happening in the US right now. And so, if anything, that is our main sort of legacy that we want to leave, is bring people to the same fact base so that they can disagree in an informed and independent way.
I like that, the independent way. That's always I think that's just important. Some people don't want to talk about, their opinion. I don't, my family doesn't talk politics with me because because I ask too many questions. I just keep that, but that's just how my brain works. But I don't, I want to be open. I want to listen. Because everybody has I think their perspective has a lot to do with their background and their experiences that they've had. That could affect their bias. As you were talking to, I think what I also see is so many the stuff is more like celebrity stuff. Um, I think maybe social media is amplifying this. I think these reality TV stuff, it's just, I mean, it's kind of fun, I guess, but only thing I watch comedy stuff, okay, because I like to laugh. That's just my thing. I need to find humor because that helps me get through the tough times, right? But some people don't want that. But I'm just trying to be kind and nice to people if they don't agree with me. And because
Yeah.
I've learned that is the best way to move forward. And I really like the idea of this, your platform, because we need, especially with the age of AI, we need to make sure we have the good stuff, the real stuff that's out there. And some people are so afraid of that. I'm sure you've heard that too. They're extremely afraid. I see it as we could be more human and embrace that aspect of our life and not just sit in you know, I don't know. I'm guilty of looking at my phone a lot, but I meant I just want to connect with others, like you said, build the communities. It kind of goes back to that. We need to be more engaged locally, right? And to see how we can,
Hmm.
based on stuff that you're finding out what's happening. We don't know what that is, and I think a lot of I read right that newspapers are kind of coming back, Kira. I mean, not because people want the local info, what's actually happened in their community. And that will make them more engaged, I think, I think that'll help reduce the fear that we have going on in our country. I say fear just because that's what these news organizations are pushing on different perspectives. So I just think it's so cool. So, I guess the last question I have for you is what do you recommend to people if they are feeling um, I know, like they need more mindfulness in their life around the media. What do you recommend they do?
Yeah. Well, I feel like we've been in this age of media maximalism for so long, and people recognize that, and people are tired, like very tired of being bombarded. And so I think that thinking about, hey, where in your life is your attention being hijacked
Mm,
and held hostage, which is a lot of places, more than when you probably realize. And obviously there's the obvious ones across social media, but there are other places too. And I think news is definitely in that bucket as well, where it serves to hijack your attention and by extension your time and your energy. And that's very costly. That's your, that's your life's power. You don't want to give it up easily. I would encourage people to think, where in your life is your attention being hijacked, and how can you get it back if you, assuming you want to get it back. Particularly in the news world, we are the pioneer of media mindfulness and news mindfulness. And I think if you want to be informed without being influenced, if you want to know more but read less, then we'd love to have you part of our mission, part of our journey of removing the noise from news. And so, reaching informed is really easy. You can either go to informed.now, or you can text our toll-free number. You can simply text join to 844-406-info, which is the same as 844-406-4636.
Okay, that I think for those that are listening, I'll include those links that Kira mentioned just to make sure, especially if you're driving, focus, right? Um, I really think this is really insightful. I love your perspective because you're figuring out a way. People always talk about problems, but you're actually coming up with a solution. That's really what we need. Need more solutions like this. And I think that'll just make people happier, right? I really think that too. That is something that brings back more time to their life and to not go. I just know so many people who don't pay attention to what's around them and they need to do that. And this will help you be more focused, right?
Absolutely. News doesn't have to be toxic. It has been toxic all along, but that ends now with Inform.
I love this. I'm so glad that we connected, Kara. And for those that are listening, again, I'll include all the links in the description and stay safe, everybody, and focus on being informed, right? Right.
Informed without being influenced.
Right, with that, correct. All right. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Bridget.